Good evening. Good evening. For the delegates who are still outside, I'm calling upon you to come back to the plenary so that we can get started. It's 1 minute to 6:30. We want to be bang on time. So kindly, would you just be winding up with your chatting right now so that we can continue pace with the program this evening, and just to hear from you as well on how the site visits have been, what has been the experiences. We started in the morning as well. What have you learned? What have you picked? What are some of the challenges that you've experienced? We'll give you a handy opportunity as well to express that. So I want to extend a hearty welcome again to all of you. First, to thank you for being amazingly patient, right, until now, and just getting a bit also of the feel and flavor of how Nairobi is so far. So, again, I'm kindly requesting, if you're outside, it is 6:30. Let's begin so that we can go full steam ahead with the program right away. We are looking forward to engaging discussions this evening with our panelists who are already here, and they're prepared for this session. And we want to glean from them, from their rich experience and rich repository of knowledge that they are going to, of course, relate to us this evening. So you had the breakout sessions, and I know I'll be moving around just to hear from you as well, to engage you a bit, to tell us how the day has been from the breakout sessions, and especially from where we're coming out right now. We had the sites visits. So we had AR, we had Bamburi cement factory that you went to, Safaricom as well, Innovation Center, Kenya Airways, and I'll be happy to hear what has been the experience so far this evening. So, as I mentioned in the morning, it is King Louis XVIII of France that said punctuality is a courtesy of the king and the gracious politeness of the princesses. So I'm calling upon for the delegates who are still outside, please come on in. I know some of them, they've just taken a tearing rush to their rooms to refresh themselves and come back, but we will continue nonetheless because of time. Even as we do that, we'll have the roving mic around so that we can get the experience of where you have been, just to give us an insight. Maybe since in the morning and the breakout sessions that you had, what have you gleaned so far? What are you taking away with yourself, right, this evening? Some pause giver that maybe before even you retire to bed, you'll be thinking about that this is something I want to take with me that will be very transformative in my sphere of influence, right? Should I ask you to raise up your hand, or you'll be willingly doing it, or I come maybe and just pose my question? You know, I'm a journalist, so I'll just throw the mic to you to give us something to say, right? So you'll kindly just give us your name and, of course, your country as well, and tell us your experience. Anyone? Anyone? Let's begin. First count. Your experience today? Hello? Your experience today? All right. Go with the mic to the ladies there who are busy crunching the crackers there. All right? So that they can give us something as well. Somebody is running away. All right? Right. Thank you so much.
Yes, so
Right. From Uganda. Start up so we can see you.
What Uganda looks like. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
So one of my key takeaways from today was this morning's session on feeding Africa.
Feed Africa.
Feed Africa. Very fantastic session. The speaker gave some ideas for businesses A lot of ideas, actually. If one was interested in doing a business, I think there was a takeaway, clear takeaway. A very engaging session. Everyone participated, and I'm so grateful that I was at that session. So thank you.
So, but if you just can give us a one-liner that you're taking to Uganda, what will that be?
Value addition.
Value addition. Value addition. Fantastic. All right. A round of applause for her. Still from the same table. Right? Still from the same table.
So I would like to share my experience from the field visit. By the way, Her Excellency's delivery was excellent.
Fantastic.
Love that. So there are lots of nuggets I'm taking from her qualities that as a leader, especially as a woman leader, that you should demonstrate resilience, having a support system, maintaining your focus, being strategic, learning, humility, having a spiritual source, among others. But I wanted to share my experience from the field visit. We went to Strathmore University. And we went to the iLab.
Yes.
And we had a brief presentation giving us an overview of the different things they do there. I recall Internet of Things. And I remember also an aspect where they look at cyber security issues. I did those a bit in the presentation. But when we went out on the floors, I remember the details more, and I remember we being in the lab with some 3D printing work that has been done. It was exciting. It was the first time I personally saw. I know about 3D printing, but to see a product of 3D printing. And I also see how they are encouraging and supporting the youth, particularly to design and to birth products and solutions that leverage technology. There are solutions they are providing in of whether for something in the area of healthcare delivery, and I found them very interesting.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Did you have a chance to go to the power generating plant that they do have? So that is also one of the key things that I know Strathmore, amongst the many universities we have there, they generate their own power. And I think also in a small, a very small percentage of the grid, but also they supply towards the power grid in this country. That you didn't have. You didn't have the time to go there.
Yeah, but it was impressive. They mentioned that they also have a green building.
Oh, yeah.
One of the, I think, most green buildings on the premises. And they mentioned they had a non-IT lab that focused on climate and more mundane sustainability, hydrocarbon footprint reduction projects and things like that. It was an inspiring visit. Thank you.
Indeed. And I think everyone is aligning that when we're talking about the environment, social governance, that is a key, component, as we mentioned earlier, that is being getting the bars, and everyone is aligning to it, because that's where the world is headed to. And this also is affecting even how we report on our profit and loss at the end of the day, financial statements that we actually come up with, the integrated reporting, and everyone has to align. Everywhere also, we were from Kenya Airways, and still sustainability is a big thing. They always say that we've not inherited this earth from our ancestors, but we've borrowed it from our children, right? We've just borrowed it from our children. That was Strathmore, all right? Anyone else that you will want to share, will care to share what they've learned, especially from the breakout session, and also just tell us from the site visit as well. That is Strathmore. Bamburi. Who are the people who visited Bamburi? Are they here? Bamburi Cement? Right, not yet? Okay. AAR, the health facility. Anyone that went to AAR? Where are you? You guys, you are not in the breakout sessions in the morning. You are not for the site visit. All these people, then, is did that table come from Strathmore? That table? All right, I'll come and ask. This table, did you go for the site visit? You did? You went to Safaricom. Good. Could we have the mic, please, and tell us, oh, there's one there. We'll come to Safaricom also to just get an experience of how it was. But you can begin from the session in the morning, or just since we began in the morning as well. Your highlights, please.
So my highlight from Fatuma, I think, the Gambia Vice President, Fatumata, was being bold and taking action. I mean, many times we know what we are supposed to do, but do we take action? And she demonstrated it by sharing from her life, and that was really big for me. Breakout session, we went, and my takeaway was psychological safety.
Psychological
As
safety.
a leader, that is something that we all need to have with us. Everywhere we lead, we need to ensure that we are providing room for vulnerability, feedback, and for people to just be who they are. And by extension, room for people to make mistakes, because sometimes it's in the mistakes that innovations happen. So that was very, very eye-opening for me, because I'm used to structure, and that's what's usually emphasized. But today, based on a research that was done, that really came up, and that's something I carried away. For the afternoon visit, I joined the AAR, which was amazing to see. We have such a facility in this country, and we don't know about it. They have state-of-the-art because they built the hospital from the get-go as a hospital. So it wasn't an afterthought, but it was something that was done out of research, out of feedback, and they really value feedback from customers, and they keep improving. So if any of you has not visited AAR, I want to recommend that visit it and just see what a fantastic facility we have. It will change your narrative on what you think about our medical centers in this country. Thank you.
Fantastic. Psychological safety, very important. Sometimes we take for granted our self-care and how things sometimes may affect us vicariously in different sectors that we're in. We maybe cancel people, and we think, who is canceling us at the end of the day? These are some of the things that in permutations we need to consider sometimes, that if your mental health also is not really shaken into place, it can drastically affect you as well. All right, let's hear from the Safaricom visit this in the afternoon, or you can actually begin by telling us also your experiences in the morning, just also to bring up to speed our guests who are here this evening who are not in the morning.
Yeah, so good evening. From this morning, Madam Fatumata was very, can you hear me?
Could we get a better mic, please?
Am I audible? Yes, no?
Just press it, long press it.
Hello? Yeah, I think that's better. So from this morning, when we leave, it was very inspirational to me. I listened to her, and the things have been mentioned, but it struck me that she sort of had to start over her life from her personal story. When she mentioned that she was a wife at the age of 16, 17, if I remember the story, and it wasn't the most perfect setup for her. And then she had to divorce and start over her life and basically pick the pieces from there. And you can trace that one bold action of having to reconstitute and reorganize her life to the challenges that she later on overcome. So knocking onto the door of politics, which was a male-dominated setup, which it is in many African countries, as daunting as that might seem, but I would imagine it wasn't quite as daunting as having to pick the pieces from a broken personal situation and having to reconstitute a life and make a success out of that. I thought it was just an important and interesting strand to pick from. So that was very informative to me. And was part of the team that visited Safaricom. Safaricom being a success that it is, just hearing about it, following the story. I'm with NMB Bank from Tanzania. So I hear about Safaricom, I follow their performance, I follow their story. It's one of those stories that we wish to emulate at NMB. I know we had a session, we shared what we are doing, and we are doing good things in our own right, but Safaricom is at a scale bigger. And so looking at the things that they are contemplating, I was struck by the fact that they just went all the way out and changed the business model from doing the telco, selling data and voice and whatnot, to just outright saying, no, we are not about that. We are about finding technology solutions to problems. And it doesn't matter what the problem, as long as there is a technology-led type of solution, that's what we are about, and that's now our business. So we're no longer just a telco, we are just a technology solution provider. Being a strategist, it struck a chord when they went out and say, in such a short period of time, they're just talking 2030, they want to be a purpose-led tech org serving the whole of Africa. That's a bold statement. And I heard the leaders, their EXCO, they are, echoing that. So good learnings in terms of what we can pick and learn without necessarily saying what they are. But by that snippet, I wish to submit. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, sorry. Sorry for that. A round of applause for him. Yes, there's another contribution from there. Two of them. Let's take, yes, I think that's the nearest. All right, he didn't see you. Welcome to you.
Hi, good evening. So I am Cyril again from Metro Cable Sierra Leone, and I was also with the team at Safaricom. So my takeaway, just buttressing what my colleague here just said, it struck me that it is really interesting. They noticed it is actually time for them to move on from just the GSM business they were operating. If you look back earlier this morning, there was a question raised by another colleague of ours that says, when should a leader dance off the stage? I think Safaricom knew, or they knew it was time for them to dance off the GSM stage and move into the technology space, which of us Africans are not doing. We just sit doing the same thing over and over again, and we expect change, which directly won't happen. We have to move with the bandwagon. We have to move with whatever is happening with the future. If not, then we'll be left behind, which is exactly why most of the countries in Africa are currently struggling. And pertaining our visit to Safaricom, the place was amazing. What we learned was amazing. If you're talking of mobile money or, yes, exactly, mobile money, it's a name well known across Africa. It's not just here in East Africa, even in a country like mine, small country in West Africa, Sierra Leone, the name is well known. We know of Safaricom, of course, we know of M-Pesa. So we had to learn a lot. I mean, there was a lot to learn as to how also small companies like ours or similar companies across Africa can implement some of their steps, can see how we can actually work together and build up Africa as a whole.
Thank you. Thank you. There's one more.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening.
My name is Conrad Kakraba from Ghana. From the first presentation by the former Vice President of the Gambia, one key thing that I took away was a quotation by Edmund Burke that the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. So she was a good person, and she felt that there was evil in the country, and she did something about it. She wasn't just, enjoying her position in the UN, but she came down to help the people to liberate their country. And that, for me, was very inspiring. And secondly, the breakout session, I was part of the section on leading the Impossible Project, Malawi's COVID-era election. And Justice Kachale, who was the former chairman of the Malawi Electoral Commission, was spot on. And he gave us 5 critical elements to success. The first one was the clear sense of responsibility. He really understood the burden that was upon him during the COVID era. And then secondly, careful evidence-based planning. He was very practical and knew what exactly was needed to be done. And then thirdly, decisive and inclusive direction, leading from the front, because he was appointed to lead the conduct of the elections, and he decided to include people and take decisive actions. Fourth, enhanced truthful communication. He wanted to turn the narrative around about the Electoral Commission, which he did. And then finally, diligence and discipline. He said no success would come without hard work. And to me, it was very, very critical that they did that. And I also visited the Strathmore iLab Africa Center at Strathmore University. And for me, it was very good for me to see what they were doing, because I teach at a university in Ghana called Heritage University College. And we also have a model similar to that, and we wanted to come and learn what exactly they were doing. And I saw how they could innovate and then incubate businesses. And the number of businesses that they had incubated was very inspiring. And I know very well that this is telling me that Africa, we have a lot of good things that can come from here.
Thank you.
Only we decide to do that.
Thank you so much. A round of applause for him, please. Let's take the last one.
Good evening. Let me apologize first. I don't speak English very well. I will do my best. From this day, about Fatmata, I think there is nothing to say. She's just an example for everybody. I will come back to my visit to Safaricom. I learned a lot there. I see manifestation of leadership. From the staff, when they were talking to us, they were explaining what they are doing. We can see the enthusiasm on their face. They are part of the company, and you can achieve that only with a good leadership. I know I'm going back to Burkina Faso with only for just that day. I'm going back with a lot from Safaricom, from Fatmata, and also I take session to Feeding Africa. They invest in agriculture. For me, I was just looking for invest in production. But during that session, I learned that agriculture is more than just production. There were logistic, fertilizer, fuel. So there is a lot of sector of agriculture where we can just analyze, find the gap, and try to fill that gap. That's what I learned.
Fantastic. A round of applause for him. All right. I think now we want to go straight into the session that has brought us here this evening to have an experience and drawing from the rich repository of knowledge of our panelists who are here. And I will have to call upon the moderator who is going to take us through this particular session this evening. But just to set the tone of the conversation, we know about the African diaspora, which has a unique needs that Africa can meet, including investment opportunities and policy influence. Africa in the diaspora are optimally positioned to meet the needs of those in Africa, such as providing financial and intellectual resources. The panel discussion on bold actions for Africa's diaspora we'll explore how to unlock the collective resources of the diaspora to benefit both Africans in the diaspora and those in Africa, highlighting success stories and ideal investment vehicles. It is Kwame Nkrumah who once said that I am not an African because I was born in Africa, but I am an Africa because Africa is born in me. Right? Anne, who's going to facilitate us here, Wangondu, has over 20 years of consulting and coaching in Pan-African leadership development programs. She has worked with CEOs and C-suite in SME and multinational corporations within the financial, telecommunications, and food technology sectors. Anne is an accredited executive and systemic team coach, AOEC UK, who is certified in Hogan Lead, that is from the UK, Kaiser Leadership, LVI from the USA, and ANDC 360 Propel UK tools as well. Ladies and gentlemen, would you kindly put your hands together and make me welcome Anne as she comes and take this session away. Thank you, Anne. All right, would you kindly also provide the mics so that we may continue pace with the session.
Okay, thank you very much, and good evening to everyone. I've seen that the KQ site visit has, the delegates have come back, so it will be interesting to hear when you're having cocktails and discussing at the tables what they learned and what they got from KQ. But to the topic of the day. Today we're going to be talking about the African diaspora. So maybe by a show of hands, an African living in Canada, are they diaspora? Okay, all right. What about an African living in the US or the Caribbean? Are they diaspora? Okay, what about a Kenyan living in Tanzania? Are they diaspora? Okay, so so that is for us to be able to think about the subject broadly. And we have three experts who are going to interrogate this particular topic with great expertise. I will introduce them, and as I introduce them, I will ask them to kindly come up and take their spots. There will be two who will be here in person, and there will be one panelist who will be joining us online from London. Clearly, a diaspora. Okay, so our first panelist is David Gatende. So David Gatende retired in May 2022 from being Group CEO of Davis & Shetcliffe after working there for 36 years. David retains an involvement with DNS as a non-executive director and is a trustee of Loop Payco, which offers digital banking services. I think we all know it. Since retiring, he and his wife Laimani have set up Elendi Limited, which has two aims. The business arms focuses on running properties they own, executive coaching, and consultancy. The social contribution arm focuses on running programs and mentorships that help men and women in emotional healing and well-being. David describes himself as a follower of Jesus, which is important to him, as this has formed his personal beliefs and values and guided all the key decisions he has made. Over the years, he has served in various capacities in churches, neighborhood communities, business associations, and sports clubs. He is enthusiastic about keeping fit, which he primarily does through playing squash, he's very good, and aerobics. He enjoys traveling, sailing, watching movies, live theater, and listening to audiobooks and podcasts. He is married to Laimani and has 3 adult daughters, Wamboi, Muthike, and Kamwende, a son-in-law, Edgar, and 1 granddaughter, Leilani. Let's welcome David to the stage. Our second in-person panelist does not need any introduction, not only in Kenya, but in the African continent. And even as he sat in the lobby of this hotel, people just came up and greeted him. As you all know, this is Professor PLO Lumumba. Yes, he is founder and chairman of the PLO Lumumba Foundation Limited. He is a renowned lawyer and founding partner of Lumumba and Lumumba Advocates Law Firm. He has over 35 years experience in legal practice and is an academician holding a doctorate degree on the law of the sea in Belgium. Professor Lumumba is an advocate of the High Court of Kenya and Tanzania, a commissioner of oaths and a notary public. He is a certified secretary, a certified mediator, and an author of several books in the legal and other fields. He's a passionate Pan-African and is the leading voice for Africa and of Africa. And I need to also add that he is a well sought out keynote speaker. So please welcome PLO Lumumba. Our third panelist is joining us online. We cannot see him yet. We're about to see him. So this is Yao Nsarkoh. I hope I got that right. Nsarkoh. Okay. He is a director, an investor, and business advisor with multiple business associations in Asia, Africa, and Europe. He has over 30 years with global consumer goods company Unilever, driving profit with purpose at senior leadership roles worldwide. Yao left Unilever as the executive vice president, global markets in April this year. He continues to serve on several boards across Africa, including in Nigeria, Kenya, and Ghana. Yao's education includes a Bachelor of Science in Chemical Engineering, a postgraduate diploma in management, and more recently, a certification in professional coaching. His areas of expertise include organizational strategy, leadership, and governance, business development, marketing and branding, and is also a sought-out keynote speaker. His hobbies include walking, cycling, and civil society advocacy. He has a special interest in development economics, management, and leadership philosophy. Yao is married with 2 adult sons and enjoys learning new things. Welcome, Yao. I know he's very surprised by the length of the bio because he gave me was very short, so I had to go to that and look. So, 10 minutes to give us their opening reflections on how they have interacted as African diaspora and with African diaspora. And maybe from that, we'll be able to learn a little bit about what are their thoughts and what some of those bold actions could be. Then I will open up the questions and comments from the room. We want to hear about your experiences. What are some of your thoughts about diaspora? What are some of the things that we could do and some of the things that they could do? But as a reminder, and I know Yao would say this, let us not think about the diaspora, the African diaspora, as one homogeneous group. These are diverse people with diverse needs. Let's keep that in mind as we hear the opening statements. We will start with David Gatende.
Thank you.
Yeah, you can. Or you can.
I think it's probably better we remove it so we can see PLO. That was blocking him. Hi, good evening, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be in your presence this evening and to be able to that very warm introduction, very flowering introduction. I feel I'm amongst distinguished people, not only as panelists, but also the people who are attending physically and also online. I want to begin by saying that I consider myself a very privileged person, very favored and blessed. As I was discussing this topic with Anne, it came to my attention in a way that I had not thought about before, that I come from a line, I'm part of a line of people who have been in the diaspora that began in the early 60s when my father, after studying in Uganda, where he went to Makerere and became a doctor, he then went to the UK and Scotland, and there he studied to become a surgeon. And he took his young family with him. I was just 2 years old. My sister Wendy was born there, and we lived there for a while he was studying and pursuing his studies as a surgeon. Now, when he came back, Kenya had just become independent. And you can imagine, for a man who was that well qualified. As a matter of fact, if I can just say it, my father was the first surgeon in Kenya. Not doctor, but surgeon. One who was qualified as a fellow of the Royal College of Surgeons. And so he was, the world, as they say, was his oyster. He had many, many opportunities available to him, and he took advantage of them. And our family benefited as a result. In fact, his brother, my father's younger brother, also benefited from they called it the airlift. I think it was the Kennedy airlift. And he also went to the US and studied. Unfortunately, he had some mental health issues and he never came back to Kenya. He passed away in Canada. But as a family, we came back in 64. And 20 years later, I myself had already been to Canada, where I studied to be an engineer. I finished in 1984, and I came back to Kenya, having lived there in Montreal, in Quebec, for 3 years. So you could say I had the experience of being a diasporian. And it was very interesting because at the time that I came back, I remember being asked by my fellow students at McGill University, why are you going back to Africa? Because it's such a dark continent, there are opportunities here, just continue living here. And I said to them at the time, I feel I have a responsibility to take back and utilize some of the education that I received in my country. And I remember applying for jobs and thinking, this is so difficult. But it really didn't take me more than 6 months of sending applications. This is before emails and before cell phones and all of that in the early to mid 80s. And I got my job fairly quickly, as I think about it now. 30 years later, from 84 to 94 to 04 to 2014, I sent my 3 daughters to Australia. And they have not yet come back. 10 years later, this is 2024, isn't it, today? In 2014, I took the last of the 3, the twins, to Melbourne in Victoria, Australia. And I remember having a chat with the middle one. And I asked Pique, what do you think about coming back to Kenya? Because she is hell-bent on getting a PR, permanent residency, in Australia. And she said to me very frankly, Dad,
do you know that I would struggle, even though she had her undergraduate and then she got her master's and she's been working in 10 years, and she has a daughter there. I would struggle to give my child the kind of education that you gave us when we were growing up. Because things have changed. The opportunities are not as many as they were when you came back from your stint overseas. And so, from my experience observing my father, my own experience coming back from Canada, and looking at my daughters who live in Australia, I would have to say this, that indeed there is a responsibility for people who go abroad, especially those who go seeking education. Now, I know there are many circumstances, and when we had a chat with Yao, he talked about what you just said, Anne, that we are a varied group. Some go for education, maybe the majority, but many also go for work, and others just to do anything. They won't mind cleaning floors, just being night guards, doing anything. But here's my point, that I do feel at some stage in the journey of being a diasporian, one ought to be thinking about how one can benefit where they come from. And I think it comes naturally, but you will find some situations where some people do not have the right paperwork. They may have gotten into the countries where they are through some various paths, shall we say, and so they are not as free as others would be to come and go as they please. But generally, there is an expectation, or I think there should be an expectation, that when one has the opportunity and the privilege, as my family has had, then one ought to use what one has benefited from to benefit one's home country. I heard an unfortunate comment the other day where somebody in the diaspora said, I cannot come back home because that place is crooked, it is corrupt, it is backward. I would not be able to do what I do here. I would not be able to sustain myself or my family. But I have to say that your home is your home, just like your family is your family. And it's where you came from. And was it not for your home, for your family, you would not be where you are today. And so I would say that, for instance, in my case, when I came back to Kenya, I worked for a year with my parents, and that was not very successful. We stayed on the farm. I was in my early 20s, and I thought I would change the world. But now reflecting on it, my parents were only in their 50s. And they say, as the Swahili people speakers here will understand, ngoja kidogo, kijana. Wait, go slowly, young man. And they wanted me to earn my stripes through working first. So after a year, I left them. And in 1985, I joined a Christian organization called the Navigators. It's a parachurch organization. I worked with them, ministered with them for another year, doing work in high schools and universities. And it was after that that I applied, and within the 6 months I mentioned earlier, I got a job at Davis & Shurtleff, which you omitted to say, Anne, your husband also works at. Anthony and I worked together for over 30 years. He is still there working, and I was very privileged to start as a young engineer and work through the ranks, and I was the group chief executive officer in the company. And our objective, our big goal as an organization was this: to improve people's lives by providing water and energy solutions across Africa. And when I started, we had one branch in one office in Nairobi, not very far, yeah? But at the moment, we have about 60 branches in Kenya and another 40 branches in 11 other countries outside of Kenya. And the company continues to go from strength to strength. So I do feel I made an impact in that period that I was there, and others in the diaspora to come and do likewise. Might I add, my own daughters. Thank you very much. And God bless you.
Thank you very much. It's very easy to say that I've had my good friend David and I have very little to add, but I'll add something. I'll add something because the subject of Africans in the diaspora is critical. And we must categorize those who are in the diaspora. They are Afro-descendants whose ancestors left the continent of Africa because of slavery. They are to be found in Europe, they are to be found in America, they are to be found in the Caribbean, they are to be found in Latin America, and conservative estimates now tell us that they could very easily be in excess of 200 million. That is slightly under the population of Nigeria, which is the most populous nation in the continent of Africa. The second category are those who in the 1960s, depending on who colonized which African country, went into Europe. You'll find them in Portugal, you'll find them in France, you'll find them in the United Kingdom, you'll find them in Italy, you'll find them in these erstwhile colonizers in Belgium. And the third category are those who comprise the latter-day individuals, young men and women who are running away from the continent of Africa. Those of you who are from Nigeria will be familiar with the word Japa, which is a Yoruba word, which means running away, the Japa group. And the fourth category are those who are your children, you of the middle class, you who benefit from the continent of Africa but have no faith in Africa. So what you do, depending on which country you are in, first of all, you do not allow your children to go through the curriculum of your country. You take them to the American system, to the British system, to the French system, to the Portuguese system, with firm instructions never to come back. That constitutes what we describe as the diaspora. And because we are asking ourselves what it is that the diaspora can do, we must ask ourselves uncomfortable questions. Because the African plight is the state of mind. And I think it is Malcolm X who put it so very succinctly when he talked about the house Negro and the field Negro. Many of us, wittingly or unwittingly, are house Negroes, because that is how we were trained to be. The education system that we went through meant and ensured that we are house Negroes. We are not field Negroes. As Malcolm used to say, when the master is sick, you ask, we are sick. But of course, the field Negro used to say, when the house master is sick, I wish he dies. I'm not being very uncharitable in that regard. So it is in that context that we must ask ourselves, when we talk about the diaspora and we talk about the continent of Africa, it is also important to contextualize the debate. The reason why we are talking about the role of the diaspora is because we are today in a continent which we say is great in prospect. We, in the 1950s through to the 1970s, went through a process of decolonization. And all of us will remember the promises that we made to ourselves, that we would eliminate poverty, that we would eliminate disease, that we would eliminate ignorance, and that we would be masters of our own territory. 67 years since Ghana regained our independence, and over 100 years since Liberia was established as a free colony of former slaves, there is a sense in which the continent continues to labor under the same problems. Life expectancy in a number of areas has not changed dramatically. Infant mortality has not changed dramatically. Maternal mortality has not changed dramatically. When you look at all areas which you may describe as areas that define development, there is a sense in which Africa appears not to have achieved what she declared she would achieve. And all of us will be familiar with the many efforts that we have made over the years. In 1963, when the first African leaders met in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, they were as eloquent as they were clear about what we needed to do. And several years down the line, much later in 1980, under the Lagos Plan of Action, we realized that we ought to add value to what we produce. We said we'd improve our agriculture. We said we would industrialize. We said we would ensure that we have energy. We said that we would earn the dividends of the first, second, third industrial revolution. We are now on the cusp of the fourth industrial revolution, but you can see that in real terms, Africa remains dependent. And today, if you look at the African diaspora, look at the doctors who serve the hospitals in the United States of America. Look at the number of Ghanaians, look at the number of Nigerians, look at the number of Kenyans, and you can say that in Australia. Look at some of our best men and women in engineering. Look at our nurses whom we are now taking to Saudi Arabia and all other places. We train our best and we export them to the world. And that is what therefore legitimately begs the question. How can we leverage on our men and women in the diaspora? And I want to submit to this august audience that the problem of Africa is in the mind. Until the day that we are able to liberate ourselves from the chains that hold our minds, then we will not be able to appreciate that indeed it is Africans in the diaspora who can bring in new energy. I remember in the year 2019, myself and others, including my sister from Zimbabwe and married in Ghana, Arikana Chihombori Kwao, we were present in Ghana with 200 individuals drawn from different parts of the world saying we are coming back to Africa to work with others and to change Africa. And that is very important because sometimes those who come from the diaspora have painted to them some kind of El Dorado, the land of gold, some kind of Shangri-La. And when they come and stay here for 2 months, they discover that the quality of education for their children is not as good as it was. They discover that public transportation is not as good as they expected. They discover that the health service is not as good as they expected. They discover that there are many hurdles, and then they go back home saying, and home meaning where they are resident, saying, it is so bad, Africa is irredeemable. So I'm of the view that there is a lot of work to be done. And one of the things that Africans in the diaspora must realize, that Africa is a land of opportunity. Has it ever occurred to you, why is it that even now, the Chinese are here? Those of you who travel across the continent of Africa, there is not a single flight that you take even to the remotest parts of Africa and you find some Chinese aged between 20 and 30. What are they looking for while we are dying in the Mediterranean Sea, trying to go and look for green pastures? Meanwhile, they are creating the green pastures here. What is it that the Turks are seeing in the continent of Africa that we do not see? What is it that the Qataris and the Omanis and all these other people are seeing in the continent of Africa? And that then leads us to the critical question of leadership. The problem of Africa is simply and squarely a problem of leadership and followership. All of us here are in the business of grumbling in fora such as this. We move from meeting to meeting, from workshop to workshop. But what we produce out of these meetings is unknown to those who are in the process of governing the continent of Africa. What we must do going forward, so that I'm respectful of the time granted to me, is to recognize a number of things. One, that there is a large population of Africans out there, and they comprise some of our best men and women, and that it is our duty to impress upon them that history has demonstrated time without number that countries are supported by their diaspora. Ask the Irish who supported them. It is their Irish in the diaspora. Ask the Jews who supported and are supporting them. They'll tell you it is our diaspora. Ask India what they did with their diaspora, and they will tell you it is our men and women who are out there who went into the foreign lands and came back. Many of you here will not have read Ngugi wa Thiong'o's book, The River Between. But when you read it, and I commend it to you, there is a character in that book called Waiyaki. And Waiyaki is told, go ye and learn the ways of the white man and come back and use it for our benefit. Number two, it is important to sensitize those of us who are still in the mother continent to recognize that it is only through synergistic arrangements that we can benefit from those in the diaspora, and they can also learn from us. Number three, that we must also do things in our education, in our curriculum, and in our governance system, create an environment that is enabling patriotism in and of itself, singing the national anthem and reciting our national motto and promising people that it's good to be Kenyan or Malawi or Sierra Leone or Burkinabe is not important. People want their children to go to good schools. We must create those enabling environments. And today, number five, it is important to give practical meaning to the promises that we have made to ourselves. We know that there is Africa Agenda 2063. When you walk in the streets of Africa and you ask people Africa Agenda 2063, do they know about it? No, they don't. When you talk about the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, do they know about it? No, they don't. Today, as I conclude, Africa is in danger of being conquered again. And I want you to remember this. All of you who are here, and it doesn't matter where you are, the supermarket that you visit, and don't tell me about globalization, because globalization is part of the latter-day problem in Africa. In Kenya, you will go to Carrefour, which used to be French. I'm told the Saudi or the Arabs have now bought it. So you are shopping from Carrefour. What you have in your trolley, Dasani, which is Coca-Cola. And when you get out of Dasani and you don't have fuel, which fuel station do you go to? Ruby's, which is French. And when you have failed, where do you go to? You go home, and who is guarding your property? Gather World, which is Canadian. And when you have a problem and you don't have food, where do you order food? You order food from Kentucky Fried Chicken, which is from the United States of America. And who delivered is Glovo from Spain. That is the state of Africa. And I'm suggesting to us that we can reverse this, but we must be deliberate about it. We must do something about it at the policy level, at the legal level, at the interaction level. And you, ladies and gentlemen who are in this room, must begin to do something about it, because the problem is intergenerational. As the Chichewa in Malawi say, more important than our children's children. So whatever we do today is not for us, but for our children's children. I need about 10 hours to speak to this subject, but I have only 10 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Prof. Thank you. Okay, I'd now like to hand over to Yao to give his opening statement.
Well, thank you very much, Anne. Good to see you again. Good to see David, and good to see PLO, who I think I haven't been in the same location with for about 10 years, PLO. Last time I saw you, I was with Kwame Owino and you having dinner at Norfolk Hotel. Time sure flies. So good to see you all. I think between the two of them, they've covered quite a bit of ground, and I will try not to repeat and therefore cause an overlap and bore you all. First is that if you look at the etymology of the word diaspora, because today it is taken for granted, but if you look at the etymology, it originates from dispersion, scattering, and you're talking about something that is in motion. So the first point I would like to make is that these days when we talk about it, it feels as if we are talking about a concrete reality, something that is genetically preordained as part of the human condition, but it is really just a system of representation for characterizing people in specific locations and geographies and so on at particular times. So my number one point, I'll be making 6 points. My number one point is that it is fluid, the diaspora is fluid, it's in flux, and it's constantly dynamic. If I take my own reality, I'm the son of academics. These academics were born in the village, in the rural areas, to illiterate people who, for one grandfather, were essentially peasants and pastoralists. In one lifetime, they made it to the very top globally of their professions as academics. That by itself was a certain degree of dispersion. It was a certain degree of diffusion. So in one lifetime, sometimes they were continental Africans, sometimes they were rural Africans, sometimes they were in the diaspora. Keep that in mind. It leads us, therefore, to the question of what is the definition of diaspora? And who has the right to define it and impose it on other people? Does a person become diasporan on the day that they arrive in another country? Or are they supposed to be there for a week, a month, a year, a decade? Who determines? It's something to pause and reflect on. When you start to think about it, you also say if a diasporan relocated and say landed in Nairobi today, from wherever, from Rio de Janeiro, does the person cease being diasporan immediately because they now have their feet on the soil? Ali Mazrui used to talk about Africans of the soil and Africans of the blood. And the truth is that it is a very fluid set of concepts that you are dealing with. So hold on to that point. The diasporan definition, I think PLO touched a little bit on it. It can be intracontinental. I believe so passionately. We are one African people. I always insist on that. Wherever I am on the African continent, it is all. But if you have traveled the African continent as much as I suspect all the panelists have, while we are one people, even among one people, there can be differences. If you just fly from Nairobi and go and sit in Abeokuta and try and eat the spice levels that is in their food, your mouth will blow up. That by itself tells you that we do have some differences. And it is not true only of Africans, it is true of all communities. Nonetheless, for those like Kwame Antonio Appiah who say that Africa itself is an abstraction that doesn't exist, I always say just take the simple example of when there's a World Cup. One African football team does well. What are the irrational impulses that draw all of us? I was in Kenya when Ghana got to the quarterfinals, and I was confused about who was supporting Ghana more, me or the Kenyan people. In fact, when Ghana was thrown out, the Kenyans were more furious and depressed than I was. So it does tell you that there is the idea that it's just a floating abstraction is absolutely not true. There's a tangible African reality, but within it, we can play different roles at different places. And within countries, as I talked about my parents, within the continent, and then PLO spent a lot of time, so I will not spend too much time on that. The reality also of colonial displacement, the displacement of the transatlantic slave trade means that you have Africans all over. In every continent of the world, there's African heritage, whether it's in India, you go to Latin America, you will find the African people there. So it's a broad and very dynamic concept, the whole idea of the diaspora. The diaspora not being homogeneous, point has been made, I like to describe it as saying that within the diaspora, you have prostitutes, you have priests, you have pimps, you have professors, and if you count Barack Obama as part of the diaspora, then you even have diasporan presidents. That is the reality of the diversity of the spectrum that you're dealing with. So when you make interventions and plans, you think about it, as one person said, in the general, there is the particular, and in the particular, there's the general. The pixel matters because it contributes to painting the big picture. But if you don't have the big picture, if you don't have the pixel, the big picture will not come. So the challenge that we have is to be able to deal with nuance, continuity, not always think in terms of mechanistic entities that we are not able to join up. We have to be able to deal with nuance. It was Mao who said that in the particular is the general and in the general is the particular. We need to deal with it when we're talking about this. Also, let us remember when we say the African diaspora, a lot of the time, as soon as you invoke the concept of diaspora, the discussion collapses into a middle-class bourgeois conversation. Who is the African? I like to ask people. At independence, so we like to call it our independence was that we had a flag, an anthem, and a dark-skinned person that we call president. So at independence, you had an elite, essentially in many of our countries, who inherited the colonialists and captured the state for themselves. There's a 10%, 5%, 4% that you want to call it, depending on which country you are in, who have significantly excluded the majority of the populace in what the state delivers. The first mistake that we should avoid is thinking that the people in this room and the people who are speaking on the panel are the average Africans. We are not. The average African tends more closely towards a peasant or a pastoralist and is therefore living in conditions of misery that to some extent we can only imagine. Let's keep that at the back of our mind when we talk about integration with the diaspora. It's very important. The task of decolonization in 2024 are still inadequate and incomplete on the African continent. We need to keep that at the back of our mind. My fifth point will be, now coming to some suggestions, and I very much, and don't worry, intend to stay within my 10 minutes. Knowledge, that is science, facts as a culture, is the primary productive force. Then I'll always emphasize that. Knowledge is the primary productive force. Yes, we have a lot of resources in the ground and so on and so forth. What you use to bring it all together so that you can extract value from it is knowledge. And knowledge can be derived from different experiences. I say different, not better. The people who know and understand the rural areas, they contribute something. Those who have also traveled and something. So what we need most is how to find a synergistic way to leverage all those pockets of knowledge so that at the end of the day, we are able to uplift our people from misery. I will therefore say, and I think PLO touched on it, and I'm coming to an end there, whether we are discussing democracy, development, Pan-Africanism, whatever it is, the most urgent task, including subordinating the rising sun itself to it, the most urgent task for the African people, especially the African intellectuals whose compatriots have sacrificed so much for them, the most urgent task is to liberate the productive forces as agents of development so that we can lift the popular classes, the ordinary people, out of misery. That is the most important thing. We should not count our progress in terms of how many billionaires and so on. The people who are living in misery today, how do we ensure that they have more liberty, more progressive egalitarianism, more fraternity so that they can access dignity and also live to their full potential as human beings? How we adopt a united approach, whether it is diaspora, continental Africans, whatever, how we adopt a united approach to deliver the, for me, is what today should be about. And for me, that is what should be the objective of development. Thank you very much. I'm done.
Thank you very much, Yao. I can see you're very passionate about your particular point of view. So before we open it up to the delegates, I just want to acknowledge our virtual audience. Thank you very much. We can see that you are listening to us, and we have received some of the comments that are coming out from the delegates that are watching us virtually. So there are two comments that I want to give out, and then I'll open it up to the in-person delegates as well. So I think this one is for David. And the question or comment is around your experience coming back. And so this virtual delegate says, I share the experience of being asked why I was going back to Ghana from Chicago in 1991. And when I arrived, I was asked by many of my own people why I had returned from America. So that's the first comment. The second one related to that is, what were the issues that you had when you came back? It makes it sound that you had it quite easy. So maybe you can comment on that, and then the audience, you can put up your hands and the mics will come to you.
Thank you, Anne, and thank you. You didn't say who it was, but Delegate.
There's John and Asabea.
John and Asabea.
Yes.
Thank you very much for commenting and asking that question. I think there is something in, I don't know what it is. You said we need to ask difficult questions. And allow me to add to that, PLO. Does the African have an inferiority complex? Why is it that the African is always looking up to the white, to the brown, to the other races, and looking outside, and even in their presence? Although when we are in class, we find we are every bit as smart, if not more so. In class, we excel intellectually and in any exam that is taken. But coming back home, as I did in 1984, I found there was a sense of awe, because then, even then, there was a sense that not many people had had the opportunity to travel overseas. What was it like? You are so fortunate, you are so lucky, you are so blessed, you've got it made, and why did you bother coming back? So I identify with those two who made that comment and asked that question. And to be honest, I must also say that even in interacting with other people, they had comments about how I had been influenced. And so some will say even the way I speak, my accent, it was affected.
Yeah.
And I cannot deny that. Others will say that because I had the university, the overseas university, that opened doors for me. And yet I only worked at one company for all those years, for 36 years. So it's not like it opened many doors, but one important door. But I cannot deny that the often used phrase that you got the opportunity to be exposed to different ways of thinking, to different ways of doing things. That is something that I have to say is true. And many times, even in Kenya, the example you used at the end when you talked about Glovo and KFC and Airbnb and all these other examples, what you find is that we who live on the African continent cannot see the opportunities, though they are right in front of us. And it takes a Chinaman or an American or somebody from the Middle East to come here and say, what an excellent opportunity this is. I don't know if you know the story of the person who came here and said he was a salesman. There were two salesmen. One came and said, oh, boss, there is no opportunity here because nobody wears shoes.
Okay.
Whereas the other salesman, who was also a shoe salesman, said, boss, this is a fantastic opportunity because nobody wears shoes. They were seeing the same opportunity, but from different perspectives. And so what I saw is that there are, and the benefit of the exposure was that you see ideas and ways of working and ways of living, and you ask yourself, if a country that is relatively small population-wise, I think Australia has less than 30 million people. Consider that. And when you look at the quality of life they have, the standard of living, or let's go to New Zealand, again, an even smaller population. And yet somehow they are able to provide good medical for everybody, good education for everybody, and a very low level of poverty. The very things that our founding fathers wanted to establish at independence that we are still struggling to establish. So I would say those challenges are still with us. And I would ask that we work together, whether we are in Africa on the continent or whether we are in the diaspora, let us work together to put into practice what we know works elsewhere. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, David. So I have a question for PLO. And if somebody has a question, please put up your hand. You'll get a mic. So you did talk about the house slave and the field slave, and that our struggle, our challenge is really a mental one. So if the diaspora have lived out of the continent in the white man's world, so to speak, do they come back and help demystify that mentality that we have? Because you talked about that new energy that they would bring.
To answer your question, I'll give the example of a country called Liberia. I don't know whether there is anybody from Liberia here. But you will remember that Liberia was established and these were freed slaves. And if you look and read the history of Liberia, those who came, African Americans, some of them, some from the Caribbean, and they found those who are the indigents. And the history of Nigeria tells you that those who came, particularly the light-skinned ones, considered themselves to be in the upper tier. And then there were those who were called the Congos, who were in the second tier and in the indigents. And it's only until Samuel Doe overthrew the administration of William Tolbert that the indigents felt that we were now represented. And I think that there is a danger that if those in the diaspora come to the continent of Africa with an attitude that we are going to civilize our kith and kin who remained in the dark continent, then they'll fail on arrival. They must come back with the understanding that our exposure to other civilizations has equipped us with certain things which can be deployed to improve certain areas in our societies, whether it's in medicine, whether it's in agriculture, whether it's in technology. And those who are in the continent must also be humble enough to know that those civilizations have certain advantages by dint of having exploited Africa anyway, and that learning can then be used to create an enabling environment. Because many of those, particularly the questions that were directed to David, are individuals who may want to come back, or they have come back and they are saying, but what am I coming back to? And when I'm coming back, what is going to happen to my children, their education, their health, their living conditions? So the answer is to be found in recognizing that there is something to learn, and there are values that you add. You who remains in the environment, you know the environment. You'll then tell those who come from outside the landmines that they need not step on in order to work together as a team. In a manner of speaking, you cross-fertilize what is on the ground for the general good But I want to conclude with this, and it's Ghana's Kwame Nkrumah who said it, that we were so victimized by colonization that it is easier to deal with the economic problems, even the political ones. But the social problem, because Africans were made to believe that they were inferior for so long, that even unwittingly, they still behave inferior. And I think X also said it, that the Africans were made to use the back door for so long, that even when the front door is open, if there is no back door, they want to create one for themselves. So it is a mental thing. So the mind is what we must work at. The day we conquer the mind, that is the day we are going to earn the dividends of the interaction between the diasporans and those who are in the digital. And I can't agree more with my fellow panelists in saying that it is not something for the faint-hearted. Thank you.
Thank you very much, PLO. Thank you, David. So I want to bring it to Yao, because I know this is something that when we were having our discussions on this topic that you talk about, that the challenges you find when, are you Ghanaian enough to, to comment on what's happening? So maybe I can bring you in to comment on how that has affected you.
No, sure, thank you. I would like to make a few quick comments about some of the things that have been spoken about. David mentioned inferiority complex of Africans. Yes, the answer is yes. Let's not beat about the bush about it at all. There's nothing to speculate about it. Yes, there is an inferiority complex, but we have to say, how has the inferiority complex come about? That's the starting point. We treat, because it has become almost part of the vocabulary of poshness, that when you speak about colonialism in Africa, you are told that you are intoning a history that was better forgotten and we should let go. And I often point out to people that the World War II ended in 1945. Colonialism in Africa existed till 1994. People are allowed to talk about the impacts and the lessons from the Nazi Holocaust and so on and so forth. We have somehow convinced ourselves that it is not proper. If we are going to be progressive, then we should stop talking about colonial impact. But you are talking about, when you go to the transatlantic slave trade, you are talking about something that has antecedents in the 15th century. And that went on for centuries. If you read Walter Rodney, you get a very clear idea of what the impacts are. There will inevitably be some of these complexes that we are talking about. And therefore, one of the first things that we must do is to recognize that the process of decolonization itself has been incomplete. How has it been incomplete? It's been incomplete in our educational system. Many of the things that we are talking about over here are not taught in our schools. You take the media, we are still dependent, as Dick Gregory put it. He says the diaspora in North America, in Europe, and elsewhere are watching the media of white colonialists, and the people on the continent are studying their diaspora and siblings through the lenses of white racists. So suspicion is sowed in our midst. There is not enough interaction among the people themselves. A lot of the interaction we talk about is at state level and at leaders of state level. That's insufficient. People-to-people contact is how people really get to understand each other and the walls drop. So yes, there is the inferiority complex, but we must see it as a logical consequence. By the way, if you look at the social psychology research that came out after the Nazi Holocaust, one of the things that was pointed out, and Wole Soyinka spoke about it many years ago, one of the things that was spoken about was exactly what we are talking about, the need for mindset changes. There's nothing new about it. Amilcar Cabral talked about it all the time. The cultural reorientation that we need to do. If you read Edubuahi, African Perspectives on Colonialism, great historian, he talked about this. Ade Ajayi, Polan Ontonji, go on and on and on. They all, Fanon, famously wrote about all these things. Part of why Sheikh Anta Diop's work is very important is because it connects us to civilization right from the beginning. But going to our educational systems, where is Nsarkoh being taught? A second cycle. Where is Edubuahin being taught? In Gugi, they teach sometimes weep not child, because that's not, why not petals? Why not matigari? So there's a task down there where we must have these conversations. I was asking my colleagues the last time, why is the wretched of the earth not mainstream being taught? Black skins, white mask. How Europe underdeveloped that. Why doesn't it feature? We have learned these things outside our educational system because largely the colonialists designed a system of education to keep us from becoming revolutionary. Because who educates you to overthrow him? And then when the people who succeeded them, in the main, I don't say all of them, but in the main, they too kept it intact so that you would not produce revolutionary intellectuals who would rise up against the system. So here we are trapped. So some of my colleagues have it was a mindset revolution, building a revolutionary commitment. But accompanying that is that you are never going to be able to liberate mindsets to the level that you should if you also do not accompany it with prosperity. China is a great example of that. During the Cultural Revolution, 1966 to 1976, Lin Biao and the Gang of Four used to say to the Chinese, rather a poor socialism than a rich capitalism. And Deng Xiaoping said that's nonsense. If socialism only delivers poverty, socialism will die. So we need to sit down and see how we improve the livelihoods of the average people in our country. As that started, what has happened to China? They have grown in confidence, they've become a world power. Lee Kuan Yew in Singapore used to say, superior achievement breeds respect. He grew up being looked at with disdain as a yellow man when he was in Cambridge University. And he went back to his people and said, I saw. So he had the openness and humility first of all. He said, I saw how they live and I recognized it was better. But let us not worry about the snide comments they are passing about us because superior achievement breeds respect. So the main reason that we do mindset revolution, cultural reawakening, we have to see it as a means. It is a means towards an end. And if we do it, we build confidence. The tangible benefits from that is that we start to see prosperity go up and we finish the task of decolonization right to the bottom of our society. Ahmed Sekou Toure, when he was at the peak of his influence and power, used to say, only the people make their own history. Only the people make their own history. Mao put it slightly different. The people and the people alone are the motive forces of history. Unless we do that, and I haven't tackled directly what Anne asked me, because unless we do that, we will face some of the issues that we face. We become all very suspicious about ourselves. If I, as a Ghanaian, want to learn about Kenya and I have to go to Oxford University, yes, then I encounter Trevor Roper saying that there was no history of Africa before white man came, because we ourselves are not talking to each other. So how do we create platforms like this? Platforms like Codesria, platforms that the ordinary people of Africa come together and we get to know each other and openly we confront our issues and we deal with them. For me, those are the issues. Unless you do that, you will always have a bit of class hierarchy coming into things, a bit of suspicion. Why does PLO speak differently from the people in Nyanza province, etc., etc.? And then instead of getting together to deal with the miserable conditions, and let's call it what it is, miserable conditions that we find ourselves in, we create two demarcation lines, atomize ourselves even further, and the fragments that are not able to make any impact in the world, we further fragment it. Then we're doomed.
Thank you. Thank you, Al. Okay. So I want to open it up to the people in the room. Kindly raise your hand and then you can make your comment or question on what you've heard. Okay, there are two here in the front.
So to Professor Lumumba, who I'm a great fan of. As a matter of fact, I'm happy to be here and just learning from this very distinguished panels, all of them. But, the question has been asked, or it's been said by one of our great Caribbean artists, Bob Marley. It says, until we emancipate ourselves from mental slavery, none but ourselves can free our mind. I'm wondering, because in many aspects, we have to recognize that we are still very much in mental slavery. Free by the masters, but are we really free? Because until I often, because I'm now starting to do business across the continent, and I often find myself correcting my brothers and sisters. I have a group that I work with in Ghana, and it says, oh, Dave, you can't trust those Nigerians. And I have the Nigerians that tell me, oh, you can't trust, this from the other country. I say, you know what? Stop it. You're all falling into that trap. So I want to know, how do we address this whole issue? Because as I've heard from many, learned scholars, that this is by design. This is a system that was actually meant to keep us in bondage, even if not in shackles and chains, certainly so by the mental damage that have done to us. And if we're not careful, it'll be to our children's children. So I'd like to hear, how do we go about actually emancipating ourselves from mental slavery? How do we begin that process? Thank you.
Okay. Hello, that's for you.
On Friday last week, I was rereading, perhaps for the 5th time, a little book written by Bantu Stephen Biko. I write what I think. And Stephen Biko, whose story you know, in South Africa, training to be a medical doctor, murdered in the circumstances, and he did not say anything new. And we ourselves are not saying anything new. We are repeating what you know. But there is significance in its repetition, because the script was well designed. Divide them in the manner that they did. So your Ghanaian-ness, your Nigerian-ness then becomes significant. And my good brother is there from Ghana. In 1997, on the 6th day of March, Julius Nyerere of Tanzania was in Accra. And he said, why do we emphasize our Tanzanian-ness, our Ghanaian-ness, and all these Kenyan-ness? At the end of it all, how does it serve us? And of course, he said it doesn't. Because out there, when they are relating to us, they are relating to us as a market. The African market. When recently African heads of states and government were in Seoul, South Korea, they were summoned as African heads of states and government to open up African markets. It happened in Italy, it will happen in Russia, it will happen in Turkey and other places. It is us to make the conscious decision that does not help us. Have we tried? Yes. Regionally, we have tried through the East African community to say within the community, we can negotiate with Europe and America as a community. In East African community, let me give you a single item. We said, in order to revive our textile industries, we don't want to import second-hand clothing. Because as long as you continue to import second-hand clothing, which in the eyes of Americans and the Europeans is dumping, then your textile industry will never be revived. So what happened? Uganda did so. Rwanda did so. Kenyans were persuaded that in order to remain in AGOA, you've got to continue second-hand clothing. Divide and rule. The same thing when the ECOWAS wanted to introduce a new currency. And had we introduced the new currency, it would have been 14 countries. The ECO would have replaced the CD, the Naira, and all these others, and the CFA franc. What happened? La Côte d'Ivoire was persuaded, and we torpedoed that particular thing. So our problem, as I see it, and others have said it, is that forums such as this, you who find yourself in positions of power and privilege, as you do, you must begin to make a contribution. Because even the companies that you are talking about that we say are successful, when you scratch a little below the surface, who owns them? They are controlled from outside. The real owners are from some outside. We are merely puppets. And when we are puppets, the puppeteer will control us. If you look at look at the accounting sector in Africa. Who controls it? Look at the legal sector now in Africa. Who is beginning to control it? When you want to sell your property in Africa, and I say this boldly, in Nairobi, Kenya, in Dar es Salaam, in Tanzania, in Mwanza, in Tanzania, which company sells your property, Knight and Frank? Why? It is important that Africa must ring fence some of the areas. That is what the Japanese did. They say, we want foreign direct investment, but in these areas we can do it. Surely we can provide our own watchmen. Surely we can cook our own meat. Surely we can have our chicken lay eggs. Why should Nigeria be importing chicken from Brazil? These are the things that we must do. It is intergenerational, but it is here. I was telling my good friend Modupe that I would have loved for him to read the documents that were justifying the creation of a Chimota College in Ghana, or the document that justified the creation of Budo King's College in Uganda, or the Alliance High School in Kenya. It was meant to create a cadre of Africans who would serve the colonialists. That is what the agenda was. So unwittingly, even when the master has already gone, they can predict how you are going to behave. You are going to use a knife and fork to eat ugali and fufu. They can predict. So how do you liberate yourselves? Is by examining our curriculum. You who are meeting here, this is very late in your life. You will not change. You will not change nothing much. You can only regret. What must happen is that we have a system that begins from the bottom. You go to South Korea, you find a little South Korean saying, I love South Korea. But your typical young African in Banjul in the Gambia looks for the day when he will run away from the continent of Africa. When you send your children, I conclude with this, and most of us here, most of you here, your children are not in public schools. And if they are in public schools, you are making every effort to remove them from public schools. And you want to go into British or American curriculum. And when they go, you are beginning to look for schools in the UK, in Australia, in Canada, and other places. And you ring them weekly. Some of you, most of you ring them because you call your daughters, you call them mommy, and your sons, you call them daddy. Daddy, don't come back. So who do you want to be here when you are telling your mummies and daddies not to come back? These are the things that we must deal with. But are we teaching them? No, we are not. It is not going to be easy, and that is why the environment then becomes very hostile, even for diasporic people in the diaspora. When they come here, in Nigeria and in other places, even in Kenya today, if you want to go home, back home for holiday, you must have security. Because if you don't have security, we'll kidnap you. Because you are from Oibo. And when we kidnap you, we'll make money for 1 year and we rest. And that is beginning to happen in all parts of Africa, in East, Central, and West Africa. So it is not going to be easy. You are here. On average, let me be charitable to you. In 30 years, you'll either be dead, or and if you are not dead, you'll be too old to be useful to yourself or to anybody. That is the reality. This is a morbid thought, but that is the reality. So when you have acquired this knowledge that you have here, it is to go back to empower the young ones so that they begin to think differently than you and me. You know, I have a foundation which has a presence in 40 African countries. And I remember one day, I went to Monrovia and I met some young boys and girls, and they now run some of the biggest cyber cafes in Monrovia. They had collected money, 5,000 each, to go to the Mediterranean. When I talked to them, they put that money together and bought second-hand computers, and they are now doing what I've said they are doing. That is what we must do. As Wangari Maathai used to say, the hummingbird, when the forest is on fire, don't complain about it, just play your little part. And I hope that all of you who are here, you have under your guidance at least 10 mentees, young people who drink from the fountain of your mistakes and your good things. Because mistakes, when you mentor people, you tell them, I made these mistakes, don't make them. That is what mentorship is all about. I made these mistakes, these are my strengths, be better than what I did. Not easy, my brother. Not for the faint-hearted, but we cannot afford the luxury of giving up hope. I'm recommending you to read a speech that was delivered in the year 1906 in April in Colombia by a South African called Pixley Kaisa Kaseme. The speech is called The Regeneration of Africa. It is one of the most powerful speeches ever given by an African. 1906, Pixley Kaisa Kaseme, one of the founders of the African National Congress. Then you will not give up.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, before we take 2 or 3 more comments and questions, there's somebody from our online audience who has said, Yao has hit the nail on its head. We need a mindset change that will benefit all of us as people with a rich culture. Thank you for that comment. I think there were 2 or 3 people who needed to comment and question. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah.
Thank you very much. My name is Charity, and I'm really enjoying this conversation. It's speaking to my dissertation. So I have a contrary view, Professor. And okay, I have a soft voice. I should speak up?
Yes, please.
Is this better?
Yes.
Okay, so I have a contrary view. And I pick up from some of the points that you made, Professor, that most of the leaders we have today are at least 60 and above. So they were very young men and women at independence. So the aspect of colonialism really should be set aside. Something that they have chosen for themselves to bathe in or bask in the comfort of colonialism, because it's easier to do nothing than to break into new ground. If I look at the educational curriculum, which you mentioned, Professor, we're talking now about mindset issues. Our education has been beset with curriculum subjects that prepare us for blue-collar jobs, clerical jobs. Very little has been done, especially in the 60s, 70s, 80s, about entrepreneurship, developing that aspect of the economy from which the nation will develop, because that's the engine of growth. Okay? So we were educated to be workers. We're not educated to be entrepreneurs. Even today, it's very rare, especially in my country, that you find an education that sets our children to be global thinkers, to be people that will come up and make a difference in the society that they have. The old Greek philosophers used to create the citizen they wanted to see. They used to plan for it years and years ahead, and then create a society around that. We just churn out workers, miners, farmers, SMEs, peasant farmers, and stuff like that. And then secondly, globalization also came late for Africa. We have not learned how to work together as African nations. To be able to come to an African state, sometimes you are made to jump through the hoops. You can't even get a direct flight from most countries to another, especially if I look at Southern Africa, East Africa, and West Africa. And I'm really talking Black Africa. I'm not talking the Arab Africa, because there it's like a whole different continent altogether. How come they managed to develop in Africa and we haven't? So those are the issues that I think we should be tackling. We are giving our leaders an easy pass. We don't hold them accountable. But every 5 years, we vote new people into office or we vote them back. And what has happened that there's no consistency in our leadership. When you find the leader comes from the opposition taking over from another, he scraps everything that he or she found in place to start again, wasting millions and millions of resources and time. We also are very poor at developing quality policies in Africa, okay? Especially, again, on human capital development, because that is the greatest index that will spur our economic development. But we are so good at not doing that, preferring to have workers than entrepreneurs develop our country. Workers will never develop our countries. Entrepreneurs will. But we don't give them enough policy backing, access to finance. You talked about the Chinese being across Africa. Previously, they were the Indians. What did they have in common? Capital. They also had the backing of their government. It's very rare in Africa to find a government that actually backs its SMEs to allow them to do well. And even to get access to affordable finance is quite a significant challenge in Africa. And I'm speaking for my country especially. So, I don't know what I wrote here. But so I was thinking that initially at independence, there was a lot of crowding out of businesses by government. They set up all sorts of enterprises, such that we became used to especially in my part of the world, to socialist tendencies. It was pro-poor, pro-this, pro-that, free education, free this, free that. We were never given a moment to fend for ourselves. And that is something that has continued today. And so I think the leadership needs to get a wake-up call. You know, pandering to the West is not going to develop Africa, like you rightly say. We have to do it for ourselves. But we need to be able to start cleaning house from the inside, to be able to do business together, to be able to trust one another. And yes, there is that mindset. And I believe that there has to be some grounding for that. But we are way past that. We need to now start thinking of African solutions for African problems. But in my country, for example, we are busy pandering to the World Bank, the IMF, and everybody else. Not that it's bad in itself, but rather we have homegrown solutions that they won't even look at. And why is that? Because we don't have any respect for ourselves as Africans. And that's where we need to start putting the values. Let's value one another as entrepreneurs, as business people, supporting one another, holding hands together. We see how the Indians do it, how the Chinese do it, how the Americans do it themselves. But we are so quick to bring each other down, all for the sake of Ubuntu in reverse.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, next two questions, comments, please. Let's keep them a little bit brief.
My name is Maurice. I am a BCA coach. So this conversation is speaking to us as coaches, basically, because what it means is we have a very big responsibility on what we have to do to improve leadership. But allow me, Professor and Yao and perhaps David, and the entire group of panelists that we have to suggest that, as Professor Lumumba has said, that the problem is in our minds, and perhaps a man of my age will not change that mindset anymore. And I'm even worried that my own children might already be having that problem, that we call a spade what it is. And I like to say this, and I've said this in other forums myself, that I feel very shortchanged by the education that I received, regardless of the fact that it has done to me what it has done thus far. And this is based on the fact that when I went to school, I was told that I need to go to school, I need to do well so that I get a job. I wasn't told that I am going to school so that I get knowledge to go and solve a problem in my village. And it is therefore the reason that we elites who have gone to school do not find our villages palatable in whatever condition they are in, because we were not sent out for an education to go back there. We were sent out for an education to disappear. In fact, I recall my uncle once telling me that I needed to do so well that I go and live in the skyscrapers of London. Thank goodness that I didn't. But I think we need to call a spade what it is, and therefore suggest that in whichever forums that we find ourselves in, Prof. Lumumba, with policymakers, wherever we come from in Africa, to actually begin to call it what it is. We need to rewrite our education system. And we need to rewrite our education system as though we didn't have what we have today, my thinking. So that we build in culture in it, we build in our Africanism in it, we build in the thought of our African solution in our training system. Nothing wrong to borrow what is good from other civilizations, and we integrate that into our Africanism. And I once suggested to somebody, and I will close with it, that there was nothing wrong with our grass-thatched African hut, because it was relevant for the weather, climatic conditions of Africa. But what did we do? We threw it away because the Muzungu was living in a mabati house, in an iron sheet house, which is not relevant, because go into one of those mabati houses in the middle of summer in Africa, it's unlivable. So what can our engineers do unless we are told to go to school so that we find solutions to improve our grass-thatched house, to improve our bridges, to improve how we farm, to improve our healthcare systems? I think we still have got the wrong education system, and we just need to call it what it is, throw it out of the window, and do it all afresh. I know it's not for the faint-hearted. Maybe it will not happen in our generation, but maybe that's where we need to begin having the conversation today. Just my suggestion.
Thank you. Okay, Nancy at the back.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the presenters. That was really insightful, but also to the questions. Maybe just a comment. I'd like to challenge the speakers, because I don't think the people who we call diaspora now are necessarily doing so simply because they are rejecting what is in their respective countries.
Many of them are economic migrants, and I think the previous speaker spoke to that. And somebody else talked about how long would we blame colonization? But I think when you look at it, I'm just going to use an example of Kenya. At the moment, we have the finance bill, and there's a lot of debate about it, about the taxes that are being introduced. But we're hearing very little about the production side, the supply side for the jobs. And significant effort is being made by the current government to actually look for jobs for Kenyans in the diaspora. So what message are we passing? Yes, we are good enough to be nurses and other things in different countries. But if you're not putting effort and putting policies in place to create those opportunities in country and putting so much effort to create them outside, then really you're just reinforcing the messages that it is better to go out than it is to stay in your own country. So I think that is something that we really must face head on and appreciate, that it's not so much necessary. We are blaming the multinationals or the international organizations that they are the ones coming here to provide products and services, and we are slaves to those sorts of organizations. But actually at the moment, many of them are pulling out. So why aren't we stepping in to say, this is an opportunity, Company X is going. I just hear people thinking about the loss of jobs and why is the government being hostile to this entity. So I think the mentality goes beyond even colonialism. It's being accustomed to a certain way of life. But I think I just want to touch finally on the difference that the diaspora people have made. Maybe not in the lives of people sitting here in this room, but there are some villages you go to, and maybe one child somehow succeeded to go and work in the Western world, for example. You actually see a transformation in that family in terms of the medical support they get, the financial support they get, the circumstances. Many survived through COVID because of those contributions. It's not the governments that are stepping in to provide these services that actually should cushion individuals. And many of the countries we've talked about, David talked about where his children want to settle. The medical, the education is free or costs next to nothing. So they can focus utilizing the resources that they get on things that benefit maybe the family as a whole, and they pay the taxes willingly. So why are we not creating that kind of environment where there's a welfare system or a fallback system, and that our hospitals work and our education systems work? We've talked a lot about aping the Western education, but it's not like the education system that you will get and follow in the village. Much as the curricula is the same, they lack the resources to actually deliver quality education to the level that would be required. So I think we are not fixing those. I think when we are talking about changing the mindset, it's also fixing things internally. Let me just finalize by saying I recently had a quote in the US about, I think it's a Trump supporter, who was saying that African Americans were better off being taken as slaves because they are now much better off than the Africans who were left on the continent. And this is something that somebody's saying, he believes it. He really thinks they should be grateful that they were spared and rescued from that environment. And you've heard the use of the word shithole countries and so forth, deplorable countries referring to Africans. We hear this, but what are we trying to do to demonstrate and prove them wrong, not right? I'll stop there.
Thank you, Nancy. Okay, so we're going to have the panelists respond and react to the comments and the questions that came out. Because of time, we're going to have each of you react and then give a closing statement. The reason being we can be here until midnight, and yet we have tomorrow to be up and early. So I'd like to start with David. From what was said, what are your reflections? And then you can give us your closing statement.
Okay, well, thank you, Anne, and thank you for those comments and questions. Very stimulating, indeed, very, very interesting. I do want to say I have sympathy for Charity. I think it was Charity who was saying that, yes, there should come a time when we stop blaming colonialism or the colonial masters. Because even the education system that we have in Kenya, for example, has changed several times. And it has been changed, constructed by Kenyans. I think the one we're using now is called CBC. And it was designed by Kenyans. And each time they think it's a big improvement on 4.4, big improvement on what was there before. So we do have to take responsibility, but we cannot at the same time deny the influence, I think that Yao was saying, the impact of the years of colonization. So it is a balance. I wanted to make a comment to quote Mandela, President Nelson Mandela, who said, "Education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world or your country or your continent." And so we are honing in on that. Whether it is a mindset change, people need to be aware and to be educated differently and to be educated to be proud of their heritage and to learn from the rest, to learn from the other continents, not just the white person, but from every race and every nationality, what is best, and then apply it here at home. So what I want to say is this, that I want to quote also something that Barack Obama said when he visited Kenya, his homeland. His father was from here, right? We take a lot of pride in that. And I remember going to listen to him at the Kasarani when he spoke. And he said, Africa does not need good leaders. You will probably remember him saying this, PLO. But he said, what we need is good institutions. Because good leaders come and go. You may have a good leader, and they'll last for a while, and you'll be very grateful to God for the period that they are there. But then comes another leader. And that leader, and I will ask you to read between the lines here, may be called to account for having had sex in the White House with an intern. You cannot do that here in Africa because our institutions are not that strong. Or if you try and overthrow the government on the 6th of January, again, read between the lines, you will be held to account. And that is because the institution is bigger than the individual, is above any person. So regardless of your office as an individual, you will be held to account. That has not yet happened here. But we have policies in place. Like, for instance, in Kenya, in our constitution, we have something called Chapter 6, which holds us to a very high standard of integrity, but it is not being enforced. We have things in place, but they need to be, it's not that we don't know about them, but people are putting personal interest, their back pocket, they're putting their own desires, their own selfishness ahead of what is best for the country. And somehow, some of these countries that have advanced have enshrined in their constitution the things that are best for their people. And so if you come in and think you can do something different, you can just change the constitution or extend your term of office or do something that benefits you or your people above what is in the national best interest, then you will be held to account. That is not yet happening here. And we hope for a better day when that will happen. And that is to be done by both the people who live on the continent, the house slaves, and the field slaves. All of us need to work together, whether we are here on the continent or in the diaspora. Let us work together to make our continent what we think it should be and what it can be and what it is in other places. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David. Thank you very much. Okay, Yao, I know you had a comment you needed to debunk, and then maybe we can also hear your reflections and then your closing statement, please.
No, sure. Well, if I'm going to try and say all the things that I want to say, we'll be here forever. So I'm just going to summarize. There's so many things I wanted to kind of respond to, but let's try. So I'll move rather quickly because a few things have come up. One is the whole area of age. Let's be careful that we don't stumble into age ageism, you can find a 90-year-old who is much more productive than a 30-year-old. So you have to allow for that. When people forget this, when Deng Xiaoping started the reforms in China, in my view, the greatest economic outcome of any development plan throughout human history was led by Deng in 1978. It started. Deng Xiaoping was 74. Read my lips, he was 74. Yet, at 74, he started a process of reforms that has changed significantly the state of China. So let's keep that in mind. All parts of society can contribute to the society, old, young, middle age, all of them. It's a question of capability and competence. And let's not be too swayed by age in that regard, whether they are too old or they are too young. Then there's the question of we are blaming colonialism. I don't think that's what has been done at all. We seem to be the only people on the earth who, as soon as we talk about our history, we are accused of blaming colonialism. No, we are not blaming colonialism. 2 or 3 days ago, do I still, okay, you went up. 2 or 3 days ago in London, they celebrated 80th anniversary of the invasion in Normandy, the storming, going to help the Allied forces. And so why are they allowed to talk about 80 years of history and they are not going back? People are always talking about the experience of the Jews. Why are we all the only people that as soon as we say the Mau Mau were persecuted in Kenya, oh no, you guys are still talking about colonialism, grow up. Come on. We cannot, it is part of who we are. So it is not a choice. The problem with a huge amount of the education that we have imbibed is that we are trained to be binary. You must always choose. That was Newtonian physics. You look at things in a mechanistic and corpuscular way. The quadrant is always 2 by 2. So it's either or. The world is more nuanced than that. Our responsibility is to manage the present and the future by understanding the historical context. Let us never forget that in this world that we live, we should not be naive. There is an interstate power struggle for world hegemony and global domination. And so you cannot be just naive and say, oh, I want to order things from my own country, and then it happens. When you want to order things from your own country, you're depriving somebody else. So you're dealing with a competitive reality, and you cannot be naive about it. Institutions versus leaders. I heard David say, I wish I had much more time. I disagree sharply with Barack Obama. His own country that he was president of did not only grow on institutions. You need leaders to manage institutions, and you need institutions for leaders to work with. Again, we are being forced to choose. It's a false choice. You need both. And therefore, you preach the wrong thing when you say you don't need leaders. Who doesn't need leaders? Which society in the world has developed in modern times without having leaders? And so I can go on and on and on, but I think we've touched on a few things. The things that impact mainly on mindsets. One, your educational system that has been teased out. No doubt about it. It has been teased out. You need your educational system. But let us also remember that poverty is itself a depressant of mindsets. And therefore, we must get serious about what economic models work for us. The idea that we just run around and we'll borrow what other people are doing and it will not work. And we as intellectuals, therefore, have to understand the conditions of the ordinary people of our countries. Again, if you take the Chinese example, Deng Xiaoping said we started with a town-village enterprise. For 3 years, we focused on rural peasants in China. And he says everybody at the helm of affairs in China was surprised by the outcome, the best of creative energy that came from the rural areas when the opportunities were granted. So we must re-educate ourselves, say what are the conditions in which the majority of our people are living, what are the solutions that they themselves see, and then work with them to scale those up. That's how it becomes culture and you change things. Now, just because at this point about that, oh, there's a historical context and there's an external context and forget about it, I want to read something that Julius Nyerere, it's a bit long, but I will read it, said in 1997. He was not even still president. He was in South Africa. He said, my friend, I'll read quickly, my friend who was introducing me mentioned neocolonialism. I'm glad you still use the word neocolonialism, because, you know, we went through a period when some of our people thought we were so advanced now to talk about neocolonialism. No. It is almost communist to talk about neocolonialism. He's a communist. Well, I'm not a communist, but I agree with you. We went through a neocolonial period in Africa. It nearly destroyed all the hopes of the struggle for the liberation of the continent, with a bunch of soldiers taking over power all over the continent, pushed, instigated, and assisted by the people who now talk about the stereotype of Africa. We have just got rid of Mobutu. Who put him there? I don't know what Lumumba would have been if he had been allowed to live. I don't know. He was an elected leader, but angered the powerful, and they removed him within weeks. That Mobutu came on the scene within weeks, and he's been there since. He was the worst of the lot. He loots the country. He goes out, and he leaves that country with a debt of $14 billion. That money has done nothing for the people of Congo. So I sit down with my friends of the World Bank and IMF. I say, you know where that money is. Are you going to ask Kabila to tax the poor Congolese to pay that money? That would be a crime. It's criminal. And that was the type of leadership we had over a large part of Africa. Not the whole of Africa, but over a large part of Africa. They were leaders put there by the French or by the Americans. What we had, when we had the Cold War, boy, I tell you, we couldn't breathe. This is Julius Nyerere speaking. Why are these texts not taught in our educational system so that we don't downplay what is going on? There is no Jewish community that will ever come together and you talk about the experience of Hitler and they'll say to you, forget about it glibly. You cannot forget about what has happened. But yes, we must now say to ourselves, this is where we are. The best example that we have of people that have moved with the same sort of experience is in Asia. We can learn from Singapore, from South Korea, from China, etc., and then tailor it to our own specific circumstances. I would like to end, because I don't think I'll have the chance to speak again, by intoning something that I like to do a lot. Martin Luther King, when he delivered the speech that has come to be known as Life's Blueprint, I recommend it to all of you because it's just 20 minutes long. He said to all of us, urging us to make our contribution. If you can't, he was invoking Langston Hughes. He said, if you can't fly, run. If you can't run, walk. If you can't walk, crawl. But whatever happens, by all means, when you wake up in the morning, keep on moving. That's my message to you. Keep moving. Thank you very much.
List. Professor Pierre.
Thank you very much. Let me agree with what has been said. And let me remind us that it is now accepted the problems of Africa, some say, have been overanalyzed. We know what the solution should be. If you look at the OAU and the African Union, you look at declarations on agriculture, on health, on free movement of people. Somebody talked about in flying in Africa, Yamoussoukro 1980, freeing the air skies. All those things have been identified. The time now is for implementation. Easier said than done. But we must go into what I call the implementation mode. And this can happen through interactions such as these. The very fact that we are gathered here from different parts of Africa is in itself indicative of the fact that we have the appetite to work as a team. And if it cannot be achieved by all the 54 African countries, let us begin to do it regionally. Within the East African community, what are the things that under the treaty of the East African community that we can do? If it is in the area of trade, how do we deal with the removal of tariff and non-tariff barriers? If it is free movement of labor, what can we do? And the same in SADC, the same in ECOWAS, the same in Central Africa, and the same in Maghreb. If we approach it in that way, I hold the view that Africa can begin to realize our potential. But we must constantly warn ourselves, and I must agree with Yao in saying this. There is the tendency, I was talking to a European ambassador and he was telling, you keep on talking about neo-colonialism. I told him colonialism is alive and well. We are not talking about a history. We are talking about something that is happening now. Look at the African Development Bank. Who is the second highest shareholder in the African Development Bank? The United States of America. Even what we thought were Pan-African institutions have been infiltrated. If you look at the African Union, 70% of its budget is externally funded. So we talk about this to remind ourselves of the dangers. When you are talking about sin, you must talk about Satan. And this is what we keep on reminding ourselves, that there is Satan out there who is going to devour us. And as I conclude, you who are in this space are truly privileged, as all of you rightly said. You are privileged in the sense that you are eating buttered bread, while others have no bread at all, so they can't even talk about butter. And when we realize that, what is it that we can do at our level? 2 years ago, under the aegis of something that we have created called the Pan-African Investment Group, we took people from 53 people from 14 African countries and met the president of Malawi, President Chakwera. And we told the president, we are coming to Malawi because we want to invest as Africans. And we want to debunk the myth that an investor must be somebody from Europe and America. Even an African with $50,000 is an investor. And I can report to you now that out of that, we are doing, through that initiative, there are people doing a fertilizer factory in Ethiopia. In other words, things can be done. And I'm suggesting to those of us who are in this forum that if we are alive to that reality, then we make our contribution. And very lastly, those of us who are coaches, we must now begin to even think differently when we are coaching. Nowadays, I'm very worried when people tell me they are international standards. I say, why were we there when these international standards were being put together? I know that even if they are international, I want them to be nuanced to address our circumstances. We have seen the Indians do it in their own small ways through cottage industries. We have seen the Malaysians do it. We have seen the Vietnamese. Right now, those of you who are from Ghana, do you know that Vietnam is going to, those of us from Kenya and Tanzania, in the next 2 years, Vietnam is going to produce more coffee than Kenya and Uganda and Tanzania combined? Yet they were at war until 1975. Those of you who are from Nigeria, do you know that Malaysia is going to produce more palm wine than Nigeria? Do we know that China is going to produce more cocoa than La Côte d'Ivoire, Ghana, and Togo combined in the next 3 years? What are we doing? And I'm saying that it is the duty of us, it is our duty to inform policy formulation, so that after this engagement, for whatever it's worth, I hope that the organizers will have a summarized document which will be sent to government officials. Whether they read it or not is another debate. But let it be sent to them, that they may know there was an engagement of this kind, and that this is what we are suggesting to government. And I conclude with the finance bill in Kenya. The assumption by African governments that you can milk a cow to death is completely misguided. Because what you create are people who then acquire the expertise of tax avoidance. And we can also learn from other civilizations, like you said. Look at Denmark. Look at what does Denmark have that Nigeria does not have. What does Norway have like that Gabon does not have? What does Sweden have that Angola does not have? In other words, we also have been co-authors of our own misfortune. All of you here from Africa, when you are called upon to elect leaders, what are the criteria that you use to vote for leaders? Your tribe. So when you elect people on the basis of your ethnic extraction, you lose the moral right to question. But when you are flying Ethiopian Airlines, you don't ask who the pilot is. You just want a good pilot. But when you want your country to be piloted, you want somebody from your tribe. We must change. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I want to say thank you to all our panelists, starting from Miao. Thank you very much. Much appreciated. David Gatende, much appreciated. Professor Pielo Lumumba, much appreciated. Let's give them a round of applause, please. Before you get off the stage, we have a small appreciation, and Yao, yours is going to reach you in London. So don't worry, we have not forgotten you. Let me ask, oh, here they are. So on behalf of BCA, for your excellent panel speaking and igniting a fire in us, we would like to present this to Mr. David Gatende. I think we need a photo. Thank you. And Professor Pielo Lumumba. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Okay, now I want to thank you very much. I know it's gone a little bit long, but it was a conversation that couldn't be stopped suddenly. And I hope that when you get back to your countries, that you will think about what you have gotten from here and what you can do to start crawling or walking or running or flying towards where we need to go. I'll now hand it back to the MC. Thank you, everyone.
A round of applause to Anne for that very engaging, compelling, riveting, of course, conversation and moderation she's done this evening. We really do appreciate it, and I thought all of you, your eyes were kept peeled, your ears were out listening keenly, but apparently we have actually to end because I know it's been a long day for you and you're tired, your energy levels are down. You need to also have dinner, and of course, you need to have a restorative night for you to be re-energized tomorrow. But even as I was listening, I was just being reminded of that song. Won't you help me sing this song of freedom? 'Cause all I ever want is redemption song, redemption song. So emancipate yourself from mental slavery. Well, I don't want to perform tonight. But that's it. We need to redeem ourselves. We need to come from those shackles and those barnacles of slavery that it is so entrenched in our minds, and be free. And so I want to thank you so much, our panelists, for that good conversation. We appreciate you. Thank you for adding to the gaiety of the occasion this evening. So we need to wind up, and I can see, just to remind you about what will be happening tomorrow, that is the program for day 2 will begin at 9 o'clock. Let's be punctual with a panel discussion on solving Africa's largest challenges. Also, we will be hosting Alan Kilavuka, the CEO of Kenya Airways, Charity Chanda Lumba, Professor Labana Yiro, the Vice Chancellor of Daystar University, that will be discussion there, one. Then two, there is a needs and leads session, a strategic network session for areas in finance and banking, investment, recruitment, HR, logistics, transportation, government, public sector engagement, sales, customer acquisition. Also, we'll have the peer learning lab session for tomorrow. As super packed, we have Dr., which is very super packed, I should say. We have Dr. Vincent Ogutu will be taking us through and talking about cultural transformations in an African organization. Also, we'll have Dr. Martin Odoroteno on leadership transitions, Dr. Thompson Mbinganjira on leveraging courage and reliability to build an African bank, Masi Unjao on leading from the rear, influencing national transformation, and David Sahadat on financial inclusivity for global prosperity, and Charity Chanda Lumpa on corporate governance opportunities in Africa. I want to say thank you to you for being amazingly patient. I will not go through the list of sponsors. We'll do that tomorrow because of interest of time, but I want to appreciate every sponsor that has made this, of course, event so far successful up to today. We continue tomorrow. As I always mentioned, it takes, of course, our whole orchestra to play a symphony. You cannot whistle a symphony. We work together and make it a success. Even as we're winding up, we've talked about strategy. And I remember Peter Drucker said, strategy is a commodity, but execution is an art. We have so many strategies in our organization, but execution of those strategies is an art. So, finally, a quote from Edmund Burke. He says, when the boundaries are broken, new world emerges. May we break those boundaries that encumber us for a new world to emerge. Thank you so very much. Bon appetit for your dinner. Have a restorative night. Let's meet tomorrow. Same time here at 9 o'clock. Thank you. And for those who are traveling as well, safe journey. We'll see you tomorrow. Thank you. Good night.